Hello and welcome to How to Get Over It with myself and my good friend Justin Cohen. Today we're tackling the big one, anxiety. So Jess, is anxiety increasing?
Ken, we are currently in the time of COVID. So obviously it is increasing. We'll talk about those increases, but I actually want to take us to the time before COVID, because even before the coronavirus, we were seeing some really startling increases of mental illness of all kinds, but specifically anxiety, and even more so amongst millennials. So we are certainly seeing an increase. And what's kind of strange about this increase is that I know this is going to sound a little crazy, but on virtually every metric, the world's actually getting better, safer. Yeah, it really is. I mean, when I ask audiences, do you think the world's getting better? They say no. But that's only because, as we'll discover, our minds tend to focus on what's wrong rather than what's right. But if we look at poverty, if we look at hunger, if we look at childhood mortality, all of those numbers are going down. So we're seeing ourselves in a much safer world, and yet anxiety goes up. Now, I understand we're doing this in the time of COVID, and right now we're not in a safer world. So I'm talking about an overall graph. We look at the overall graph of progress, it's going up, but this is a dip, right? Certainly. And yes, right now we're seeing something that really I was totally struck by. It just came out a couple of weeks ago in Time magazine that emotional distress severe enough to qualify as a mental disorder has increased sevenfold during the time of the coronavirus, sevenfold. So that's an external circumstance which is going to settle, and when it does, those numbers are going to quieten down. But the problem is, with a big stressor like this, we can then become anxious, develop a disorder, and then even when that external stressor is over, we've now maintained that particular response to the world. And that's why it's so important to deal with this.
Yeah, I mean, it brings me to the question, what is anxiety actually? Because I mean, it's a word that gets thrown around so often, but I think we need to talk about what is this thing?
Absolutely, absolutely. What is actually going on here? Because we have a lot of different ideas. Einstein said if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes on the problem, understanding the problem, defining the problem, and 5 minutes on the solution. So there's a lot of different treatments out there. And many of them, from my own experience, I can tell you, are really not effective. And when you actually understand what anxiety is, you can start to see why some of these treatments are not as effective as you think they would be. So fear is the feelings of nervousness that we feel in response to a real threat, such as somebody pointing a gun at your head. Yeah? Anxiety is the feelings of nervousness in response to a perceived threat, such as the thought of somebody pointing a gun at your head. Now, when the external threat goes away, so does fear. But with anxiety, there is no external threat. So as long as you're thinking about your business going bankrupt, your partner dumping you, your increased heart rates, being an imminent heart attack, you're going to remain anxious, right? Nothing out there can really make it go away because it's not out there, it's in here. Yeah. And I'm not saying that there aren't external circumstances that can trigger that anxiety. Absolutely. But this is what makes anxiety so much more pernicious, so much more persistent than fear, because it's not actually coming from out there, it's coming from in here.
Oof. And I think that's the hardest thing to deal with, right? Because when there is a perceivable threat in your external environment, there's almost something you can do to fix it, right? Mm-hmm. If you're in danger, you can run. If someone is endangering your life physically, you can remove yourself from that situation to some degree. And there's something to point a finger at to say, this is what's causing my pain and distress. Whereas with anxiety, as I hear you describing it, it's all in here. So how do you win an internal battle?
Right. So, and I really want to be clear to anybody out there who's struggling with anxiety. I don't think anybody likes being told that it's all in here, right? I mean, people sometimes get the sense that it is in here. And that's why if you tell somebody that their anxiety is not rational, they are actually likely to tell you that they realize that it's not rational. But at the same time, there's we want to be careful not to undermine somebody's experience, because, you know, it might be coming from the inside, but it feels extremely real. And the truth is, Ken, once again, anxiety is certainly triggered and exacerbated by what happens on the outside. I mean, I think there's a big question about why have anxiety levels gone up even though the world has got safer, more comfortable. And there are a few reasons given. You know, one of them is that we're just better at reporting. And I love this. You know, when I was a lot younger, people didn't openly talk about their anxiety or their depression or their mental illness. And what I'm seeing is, you know, Generation Z, millennials, they are much more open. So it may be that people are just more open, more transparent, and they're actually reporting it more. But is it possible that there's something else going on? And a couple of other possibilities. The one is actually social media. So most people actually report feeling worse about themselves after being on social media, because what social media does is it shows you these sort of idealized lives of everybody else, right? And that can really create a sense of envy and dissatisfaction, like, why is my life not as good as those, right? Of course, those lives are probably not as good as those lives seem to be either, right? That's why it should really be called fake book, yeah? And so what social media has created is a lot of social anxiety. But the other thing is, and I'm afraid once again, this is in Mr. Zuckerberg's corner, is the way the fake book algorithm works is all about getting advertising revenue. Now, as we're going to discover in this masterclass, the brain is like Velcro for the negative. It sticks to the negative. It's like Teflon for the positive. Just think about it. Something good happens in your life, yeah, you're happy, but you quickly forget about it, right? Something bad happens, you talk about it, you think about it, you make everybody else depressed about it, right? And just the way the brain works is it focuses far more on threats than rewards. Now, the algorithm on Facebook and social media is such that it wants you to stay on an article, even if it is just fake news, if it is just a ludicrous conspiracy theory, even if it is just junk news. It wants you to stay there as long as possible because that's the way you get advertising revenue. And so this algorithm is actually moving us more to the negative because our brains have that predisposition, yeah? And by staying with that negative news, we get more anxious. And so it's kind of weird to consider that it's possible that the increase of anxiety has to do, you know, with not getting enough likes on our Instagram post as much as the sensationalized thought of a nuclear bomb, yeah? It's these negatives that are actually, that may be responsible for these increases. But having said that, Ken, I do think that it is part of the human condition that we are predisposed to anxiety, to high levels of perceived threat.
And I want to know why that is, Jess. Why is our brain so much more in tune or there's an addictive quality to negative news, right? Whereas, like you say, when positive things happen to us or for us, it's very quick to take it for granted. You're like, yay, I'm happy. Yeah. But a minute later you forget. And like you're saying, if it's negative, you honor it. So why is our brain conditioned to be that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I struggled this for many years because I was teaching positive thinking and teaching optimism. We'll see how powerful this is, but I still found I had a lot of negativity. And I thought, hey, there's something wrong with me, or, you know, I'm just an old grouch. And then I realized, no, as the neuroscientist Rick Hansen says, we actually have a negativity bias, and there are reasons for it. So we actually tend to gravitate towards the negative. And by the way, this is why it's so important to actively cultivate a more positive, optimistic mindset. So the question is why? And to understand that, I find we get the best insights from evolutionary psychology. Now, evolutionary psychology explains emotion and any other human behavior in terms of an adaptation to the environment that increased early humans' ability to survive and to thrive, right? It raised their fitness. Yeah? And so if we have high levels of anxiety, if we have high levels of emotional distress, then that must have helped early humans to survive. And it turns out that it did. So we need to go back to the environment that those early humans developed in, the caveman environment of our early human ancestors. And this was a really truly dangerous environments. It's estimated that the average lifespan was 17. You were in continual threat of being eaten by a hungry tiger or uncle. And the ones who survived long enough learned to do two things really well: fight, or in my ancestors' case, flight, right? And to fight or flight, what you needed was a hyperreactive threat detection system, right? That you were able to detect threats very quickly and respond to them very quickly. In fact, there's a part of the brain, it's the lower brain. Brain is complex, but it's useful to think of yourself as having two brains. Lower brain is what we call the reptilian brain. It's where we've got the fight or flight response, and a part of the brain called the amygdala. And then the higher brain, where we've got our prefrontal neocortex, where we've got morality and focus and attention and awareness. So this lower brain was really important for our early ancestors, right? Because that's where the fight or flight response was. That's where the threat detection system was. So these guys had to do two things really well. They had to, number one, get lunch. Number two, avoid being lunch. If you failed at number one, you're never going to get to enjoy number two again, right? You see, if you overestimate a threat, you get to live another day. If you underestimate a threat, you die. And so that means that there's a basic algorithm driving our human operating system. Overestimate threat. Now, that doesn't seem very smart if you're aiming for happiness, right? Because if you're constantly seeing threats around you, that is not a recipe for peace, calm, and angelic joy, right? But you see, the brain is much less interested in happiness than it's interested in survival, right? And so this algorithm drives our survival, overestimate threat. And so what I say is we've got a hyper-reactive threat detection system. It's part of our human operating system. And if we're to get on top of our emotional distress, if we're going to get on top of our anxiety, we actually need to reprogram our brains. We need to dampen down the threats. We need to learn to quieten that alarm system, right? We need to tell ourselves, it's okay. It's not as bad as we think. The world is not about to end, right? You know? I mean, you think, and even where we are now, the coronavirus, this is, and listen, this isn't about like some sort of like Pollyanna, denial of reality. I mean, we are in the greatest global disaster since World War II. I don't know about you, but I'd rather be here than World War II. Yeah. Like if this is our big global disaster, yeah, I mean, I think we can deal with this. But the sense, if you look at anybody, is that, wow, this is terrible, this is bad. And don't get me wrong, yes, this is for different people as well, depending on your situation, this can be catastrophic. But overall, if we look at it as a global issue, probably not to the degree that we think it is, because remember, we tend to magnify, exaggerate, focus on threats.
Wow. Yes, and I think for me, like that explanation actually brings me so much peace in some way, just knowing that my brain is designed this way, because then you don't feel crazy, you don't feel like, what's wrong with me? That I can't be happy, I can't be happy in long periods. But just talk about, you have done certain treatments, and these treatments didn't work for you. What kind of treatments do you go to for anxiety?
Right. So look, firstly, Ken, I mean, I love what you said there. And there was a time for me where I thought there's something wrong with me. My brain is broken. I'm defective, because as you know, I developed an anxiety disorder, right? I was a depressed kid, and I struggled emotion as a kid. But when I discovered psychology and the personal development movement and meditation and relaxation and deep breathing and learning to change my mindset, it really did transform my life. And I became really what I would think is one of the happiest people around. But yes, I still struggle with some negativity and distress, but overall in a great state. And then what happened to me, there were a lot of stresses. So remember, yes, there can be external stresses which can then activate. I had a big professional disappointment. I was doing some property investment. I had a building in the inner city of Johannesburg, which was being hijacked. I had major potential financial concerns that could sink. So there was a lot that was going on out there. And in the midst of it, I got into a conflict with a colleague. That was really quite a severe conflict and seemed to trigger some early childhood abuse that I'd experienced. There'd been sexual abuse, there'd been domestic violence. But I addressed that and dealt with that, but it seemed perhaps to have been reactivated. And so my particular sort of anxiety disorder was intrusive thoughts. I'd have these intrusive traumatic thoughts. So just anybody has never had an intrusive thought, the truth is we all have intrusive thoughts because we have thoughts that we may not want. But when it turns into disorder, imagine your worst, most disgusting thoughts and you're kind of thinking it 24/7, right? You just kind of can't get it out of your head. And so that was my particular variant. And if that does sound a little crazy to anyone, just know there are many different kinds of anxiety, right? We've got post-traumatic stress disorder, we've got generalized anxiety disorder, we've got intrusive thoughts, we've got PTSD, GAD. So there are a whole bunch of different types. But what we've actually found is that the research shows what heals one usually heals them all. I say, these different forms of anxiety are a bit like snow. There might be 50 different types of snow, but what melts one usually melts them all. And so it's actually less important the specific kind of anxiety that you're experiencing, panic attacks. It's just a manifestation of emotional distress, right? These are just labels that we give to describe the different kinds of emotional distress that are out there. So I had a lot of skills, a lot of tools at my fingertips, right? I mean, I had self-hypnosis and relaxation, meditation. When I was meditation, I'd done 10-day silent Buddhist meditation retreats, right? So I really knew how to meditate. And so I had all these processes, mindfulness that, that we're taught, deep relaxation, breathing, etc. That honestly, I didn't understand why at the time, and we'll see why that was, actually made me feel better at first, but actually worse later. Mm. And so I got really desperate, so much so. There was a point where, honestly, I was suicidal because when you're stuck in your own head and you feel so out of control within your own mind, sometimes the only way out, seems like just getting out of your life. And at that point, when I was then faced with the suicidal ideation, I thought, okay, man, it's time to be humble, to go back to the drawing board, to understand that I don't understand, right? And that can be very powerful because I decided to go back and really explore just about every major psychotherapeutic treatment, even those that I'd actually rejected at university. I was like, damn it, I'm going back into this, right? So the first one that I investigated was depth therapy. Now, depth therapy was created by Sigmund Freud. That's the original therapy. Freud is really considered the father of psychotherapy. And the idea is actually fairly simple. What he believed was that anxiety and depression were really the symptoms of repression. That something had happened in your early childhood, possibly a trauma and abuse, or possibly even just a dynamic that you had with a parent. It may not have actually been abuse. Freud didn't believe there was always abuse going on, but something happened there. You try to repress it, usually had some sexual overtone there. And bear in mind that Freud was working at the time of the Victorian era where there was a lot of sexual repression. So a lot of people were dealing with sexual desires that, were totally taboo and didn't know what to do with them. And that could create anxiety, right? So you've got to understand these therapies also that often they were part of the time, that they emerged in. But the idea was that if you then became aware of the sexual desire or this particular trauma and just brought it to consciousness, it would be pretty frightening at first, but you would then accept, okay, this had happened, or this was the thought that I had, and you would have this catharsis, this emotional outpouring, and you would come this tremendous relief, and you would be cured. And that's exactly what I went in, right? So I went in this, and it really is quite an amazing therapy. If you've ever gone in there, it actually feels pretty amazing because somebody is there with you and you go back to that trauma. I went back to my childhood sexual abuse. I went back to the domestic violence and also, depth therapy is all about, creating a story, a pattern. So I began to see these connections between my childhood sexual abuser and this person that I was kind of having this conflict with and the aggression of my father and his aggression. I saw these connections all made so much sense. It was all just sort of coming together for me. And I relived that early abuse. I remember I was, just, and I say this with a smile. Because they were actually joyous tears. The catharsis was amazing. There's stress chemicals in tears, right? So crying can actually be enormously relieving and soothing. And I remember I had to go to a meeting after that particular session. And I was in the car and I was still crying so much with this kind of relief, really like relief crying. And I actually had to pull over because I couldn't see through the tears. And then I went into this meeting, and I was like, I was like, how am I going to go into this meeting now? I said, guys, sorry, I just had really bad hay fever. So and it felt amazing. I was like, oh my God, I'd rejected this, right? So I was never into depth therapy. I was like, oh, going back and forth. I knew what had happened. And I just don't like the idea of, constantly revisiting the past. And I thought, okay, listen, I got it wrong. This works, man. This works. Except it didn't. Because within a few days, I had the same anxiety and the same intrusive thoughts. And that's the problem with depth therapy, is it's not just me. The research shows us it's just not particularly effective in curing anxiety and depression. Even Freud himself said that the best his therapy could do was convert, how did he put it, hysterical misery into everyday common unhappiness. Inspiring guy. Listen, I got to tell you, I'm actually a huge fan of Freud, because he was an absolute genius, and he really did help us to better understand ourselves. I mean, many of the words that we use, like narcissist, unconscious, repression, projection, splitting, I mean, these terms really help us to understand ourselves and our relationships. So Freudian theory is used in film theory, it's used in social theory. I mean, it has a lot of application, but it just isn't effective in actually curing emotional distress, right? So the next thing that I went into was something that's probably familiar to many people watching this. It's a very common form of therapy, and it was initiated by actually a Freudian-trained psychotherapy, R.N.T. Beck. Now, R.N.T. Beck was a therapist working in the 1960s in the University of Pennsylvania. And he had a client a patient, you didn't call them clients back then, they were patients, it was the doctor and the patient. And this patient came to him, and she had a lot of anxiety, and he suggested to a very Freudian interpretation. He said he believed that her anxiety was coming from her repression of her sexual impulses. Classic Freudian interpretation. And she said, doctor, the reason that I'm anxious is because I'm afraid that I'm boring you. So far from boring her, that patient sparked one of the greatest revolutions in psychotherapy. Because what Beck realized is that so much of our emotional distress comes not from early childhood events, but from our current beliefs and thoughts about ourselves and the world. So this woman believed she was uninteresting, boring, right? And so that made her anxious. Whenever she was talking, she was feeling anxious. And what Beck realized that if you then actually dealt with those thoughts, created new interpretations, right? Replace those self-defeating beliefs, you could then improve emotional well-being. And this particular form of therapy has become known as CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And cognitive just means thought, right? So the idea is that your thoughts change your emotions, and your emotions change your behavior. And so really what you need to be focusing on is your thoughts. Now, I had been very familiar with CBT, and I'd used principles throughout my life. And as I applied it to this particular situation in my own life, it certainly is helpful, because, when you're in a really tough emotional state, you can really exacerbate it by your beliefs about how bad and terrible this is, and that there's something wrong with you. And so with CBT, by changing my interpretation, I said, hey, you know what? This is a great opportunity to learn, to grow. I'm in the personal development field. I mean, I've hit a block, and, obviously other people have hit a block as well. So this is a fantastic chance for me to break through that block, to figure something out, and to share a better message with the world, right? So I was able to take this challenge and see it in a much better light, and feel a bit more resourceful and positive and focused by it, right? Like, one of the interpretations that's really important for anybody who's watching this, who's struggling with emotional distress, this is really important. What we know is that you can take one of two interpretations about your state. And the one is, this comes from Carol Dweck, a professor at Stanford University, is you can have a fixed mindset. Now, fixed mindset says, look, I'm anxious, I'm depressed because it's in my genes, it's my brain, and it's fixed and I can't change it. Now, you can see how dangerous that is, Ken, right? Because that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you don't believe you can change it, you don't even try, you give up, it's over before you even got out the starting blocks. Now, a growth mindset says, look, I'm in this position, but you know what? I can change, right? I can fix this. I can grow. There's a way through, there's a way over, there's a way out, right? And in fact, that growth mindset is far more in keeping with what's going on between our ears. Because while we used to believe that the brain was actually pretty fixed, that, past adulthood, it didn't change much, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the brain is plastic, not in the paper bag sense, but plastic in the sense that it changes, it's malleable. And we can actually see this. When you do the things to shift your anxiety, to become happier, we can actually see shift in the left prefrontal neocortex. That's where happiness is located. You'll actually see new neurons growing, connections between neurons, and even switching on and off the genes that determine their functioning. So the brain is really an organ that learns and grows. And this is part of the new science of neuroplasticity. So a growth, whether you know about neuroplasticity or not, you can still have a growth mindset, right? Because the growth mindset is based on the interpretation that wherever you are right now, you can change, you can grow, you can improve, you can be better. Yeah. And I just want to let you know, to anybody who's watching this, that is the truth. Right? The brain grows throughout our entire lives, right? But it takes time. It takes effort. We've got to create new habits. It's like you don't just go to the gym and expect to get new muscles overnight, right? You do it over weeks and months, and that then changes the muscle. Same with the brain, right? The brain is like a muscle, right? If you follow through much of what we learn in the Transcender method, and you actually do this on a daily basis or take on these new healthy habits, you will actually change your brain. And this is what's so exciting.
Wow. And you actually mentioned it, Jess. You were speaking about the Transcender method. And you spoke about, the therapies that didn't work for you in particular. And I want to just, before we go on to the Transcender method, I want to speak about, some people think that, when you have anxiety, the first thing you should do is self-medicate. Whether it's herbal, whether it's, prescriptive. And I just want to hear your take on that between self-medication versus actually doing the work. Because, we all know the fat pill, I'd rather go to Dis-Chem and get the pill that's going to make me lose weight like this than go to the gym and actually work those muscles out.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm really glad that you asked that. So yes, after trying, that was the final for me, was actually trying medication. I always, look, let me start by saying, I think that for some people, medication can be a help. Okay, so I just want to be clear here. I am not ideologically against drugs, right? If I was, I wouldn't be able to have a drink. I wouldn't be able to drink caffeine. Caffeine, alcohol, these are drugs, right? Or even take a painkiller. So I think it's really important for us to understand how drugs may be able to help anxiety, but how they can make anxiety worse. And that's the problem. There's a lot of drugs there that are available by prescription, your doctor will give you, that are not a good idea. And the thing is, drugs, as you say, they're so popular because they directly manipulate the neurochemistry underlying emotion, right? They provide this chemical shortcut that demands nothing more than popping a pill or having a drink, right? And if you've ever had a drink after a long, stressful day, well, you've used a drug. You've used a drug. You've used alcohol to knock out your stress. If you had a few more drinks than that, then you might have been going for something more calming, like a coma. Now, alcohol activates a neurotransmitter in the brain called GABA. And GABA is the brain's own natural relaxant. And that is why when you're stressed or anxious, you may find yourself going for the alcohol. Now, there is a prescription drug that does something similar. And these are the drugs that are commonly prescribed for anxiety. And this was a drug that I tried, which is Xanax. Now, Xanax is a benzo, benzodiazepine. And benzodiazepines also activate GABA. Now, if you've ever had a benzo and you've ever had alcohol, it feels somewhat different. So they activate the GABA in different ways, right? And so you're better off driving on a benzo than you are driving on alcohol. Although if you have too many benzos, it could be as dangerous, right? But these are different drugs, but what they're both doing is activating GABA. So when I took Xanax, I can tell you, again, much like alcohol, immediately I noticed my anxiety, my stress settling down. Even the intrusive thoughts that I was dealing with faded. And it's actually quite amazing. I mean, you can see how people really get into these drugs because it's like, oh my gosh, wow, this really works. But the problem is, very soon after, my anxiety came back bigger than it was before. And so drugs, legal drugs, have many of the same problems as illegal drugs, right? They can lead to addiction, right? Withdrawal symptoms when you're trying to get off them. Tolerance, so you need more and more to get the same effect. That was for me, so I found I needed more and more to get the same effect. And then the rebound effect. And the rebound effect is that when you come off it, you're actually feeling worse than you were before, right? Because you boosted that GABA in your brain, but now the GABA is depleted, yeah? So, society has a very weird attitude to drugs. We either give them to you or lock you up for giving them to yourself. And I know that I'm making a little bit light of a serious topic here, Ken, but I really do feel very passionately about this. Again, we've got this crazy, distinction about legal and illegal. Let me tell you something. The worst drug dealer on the planet is a pharmaceutical company called Purdue. And Purdue produces a drug called OxyContin. Let me tell you about OxyContin. 80%, there's another epidemic people have forgotten about right now during Corona. It's a drug heroin epidemic in the United States. But here's the thing that most people don't know. 80% of heroin users started on legal prescription drugs produced by OxyContin. And I guess I get so angry about this because I think there's a lot of people out there maybe on the streets who are selling a drug. I don't know, I don't say they're all great human beings, but some of them, that's just kind of what they found themselves doing and they didn't have any other options and they're locked away for the rest of their lives. But those executives at Purdue pay a nice fine and they go back to business as always. So that's my little soapbox for today. I'm going to climb off my soapbox now. And look, I do want to say, benzos, notice I'll stick to the shortened version, benzodiazepines are not as dangerous as opioids. They're not. However, the research shows us that over time, benzos and alcohol, just like alcohol, will make anxiety worse. It's one of these things that's going to make you feel better at first when you take it, but it's going to make you worse later. Now, there is another class of drugs that can be helpful for some people, and that's Prozac. Now, these are called SSRIs, serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So serotonin, also naturally produced in the brain, one of the key chemicals that boosts our happiness. Serotonin, interestingly, is boosted by Prozac and the rave drug ecstasy. Again, in different ways, right? So the way that ecstasy does it is you get a real boost of serotonin, whereas with Prozac keeps the serotonin between the synapses of the neurons for longer. Now, Prozac was initially created for depression, but as often happens with drugs, it was then found to be actually fairly effective for anxiety. SSRIs are better than benzos because you don't take them like an alcoholic drink whenever you're feeling anxious, right? You take it every day, and so it just gets into your system and it changes your system. Now, you can still have withdrawals when you're trying to get off it. You can still have tolerance where you need more and more, and it could be a rebound when you do eventually get off it. But because you're staying on it, many people stay on it for their whole lives, and it is not too much of a problem, yeah? It doesn't work for everyone. It's probably between 40 and 50% of people, and even those people tend to need to increase or change their dose. One of the dangers with drugs is that, certainly anybody who's looking to go on a drug, please do it through a psychiatrist. Don't do it through your GP. Do it through a specialist in these psychiatric drugs. I don't say all these psychiatrists get it right all the time. They don't, but at least you've got an expert. One of the dangers, though, is that when you go into psychiatry, is that you take a drug, it might have negative side effects. So then you take another drug, then they put you another drug to deal with those side effects, and then you're on this cocktail of drugs, right? And so there are many people out there who are on cocktails of drugs who are now trying to get off those drugs. And please don't do it on your own. Do it with a medical practitioner. Do it with a psychiatrist, because the withdrawal, just like getting off an illegal drug, there's a lot of withdrawal, and you just need to deal with that withdrawal properly. So there are organizations that can help you to do this, or even there are psychiatrists who are now aware of this and will help you to get off those cocktails. So yeah, if you think that the psychiatrist is the way to go, drugs are the way to go, you want to do it through a psychiatrist. If you feel that you're really on too many drugs and you want to get off them, you could tell your psychiatrist, or in fact, there are responsible ways to do that. And maybe what I'll do at the end of this is I'll leave a resource. There is a great organization in the United States which you can connect with, which will help you with proper medical care to get off those cocktails of drugs. So certainly can, for me, no, drugs were not the answer. They weren't the answer at all. As I say, I'm not saying that they can't be helpful. We do have research to show that a combination of CBT and drugs together can be pretty effective for anxiety and depression. But again, certainly not universally so. And certainly the more important part is the CBT, not the drugs.
Thank you, Jess. And I think, you know, for most of us out there, we explore so many different options, especially when you are feeling, whether you're suffering from PTSD, anxiety, you know, whatever it may be for you on a personal level. I think we have heard the option of drugs. And I think the way you laid it out is important for us to understand both the benefits, but also the risk involved with going the drug route. But now,
I can, absolutely. And maybe just one more thing I want to say here. You know, I have sometimes people say to me, you know, no drugs. I want to give drugs evil, drugs bad. I'm like, you know, guys, we are neurochemical beings. Now, we have brains. You know, one of the things that I find amusing, and this comes from Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary was one of only 2 professors to be fired by Harvard University. Timothy Leary was doing some of the groundbreaking research on psychedelic drugs in the 1960s. Now, interestingly, psychedelic drugs are actually being used very effectively today and in government-sanctioned research on addiction, strangely, because psychedelic drugs aren't addictive, right? They actually, there's one study right now showing it to be one of the most effective forms of treatment for smoking addiction, for grief, for a whole range of different conditions. Now, pretty old Timothy Leary, because he was doing this in the 60s, where there was this great big paranoia about these things, right? And as you know, these drugs are still illegal, but they can be extremely helpful. And Timothy Leary used to say, but the way that these drugs work is you don't take it like Prozac, you don't take it every single day. You actually take it once. You take it once with a psychotherapist and you go on a journey. You go on this intrapsychic journey and that's it. You never do it again. Now, the problem is pharmaceutical companies like Purdue aren't going to be producing this because why would you want to give people a drug once? You know, once and cure them? Are you crazy, dude? Like, how the hell are we going to make our billions so that we can sell more people OxyContin so that they become heroin addicts? I'm going to get back on that horse just. So the psychedelics, the pharmaceutical companies have no interest in them, right? Because you don't take them on a regular basis. But what I wanted to share with you is Timothy Leary used to say, you know, make this point that, you know, we're not all brain and we're not all mind. We're both, you know. And what he liked to say is that psychiatry has lost its mind, right? Because all psychiatry wants to focus on is chemistry and neurons, right? And he said psychology has lost its brain, right? Because all it wants to focus is on your thoughts, right? And so we're both, guys. We are both. Yeah, we are psychobiological creatures. Let's embrace it. Yeah, and we all use different drugs. Food is a drug, right? Water. I mean, these are the things that we do that actually change our emotional state. We know that eating healthily each day, 5 fruits and vegetables, is not going to cure your anxiety, but it's what we call an emotional hygiene factor. Eating healthily, exercise, 8 hours of sleep, right? These are ways to safeguard your emotional state, yeah? And certainly the nutrients that you get from food are, you know, they generate your neurotransmitters, right? So let's not forget, we are psychophysical beings. But yes, and overall, drugs were not effective for me, and I would say probably not effective for most people. I was to find my cure elsewhere.
Wow. And I think it's important to make that distinction in terms of, you know, the fact that food is somewhat of a drug. It changes your biochemistry. When you're eating healthier, I think all of us know we feel better. Is it ideal? Probably not. Like, you know, most of us will suffer through that healthy meal. But do you feel better after eating, you know, a healthy meal versus McDonald's? Of course you do. You know, so I think this is what leads us to the Transcender method, a method you actually came up with during this whole journey, Jess. So what is
Right.
the transcender method?
So Ken, I've got to take you back a step, and that is we were talking about these high levels of emotional distress, right? That we predisposed as human beings to have. Oh, and by the way, there's a lot of different personality profiling systems, but the most authoritative is the big five. So extroversion, introversion, openness, closeness, conscientiousness, responsibility, irresponsibility, agreeableness, disagreeableness, and neuroticism. And neuroticism was Freud's term for anxiety, and so that, which another term for it would be emotional stability. So the point is that on the big five, anxiety registers as something that we are all subject to, right? But it's a continuum. So people often think either an extrovert or an introvert. Well, actually, most people are ambiverts. We're in the middle. And it's the same with emotional stability, emotional instability. Very few people are totally emotionally stable or emotionally unstable, right? We tend to be around the middle. And what we want to do is see if we can change this. And this is the cool thing, right? When we think of a personality trait, we think of it as being immutable. In fact, personality changes over life, and we can actually change this trait. We can shift ourselves. And that's what I want to share with you, how we can all, no matter whether you've got an anxiety disorder or you just deal with some anxiety or a little bit of emotional distress, we can all make that shift. So yes, we are all prone to anxiety. We're all prone to emotional distress, but why is it that some people actually land up developing a disorder? And I think when we understand that, we're going to be able to start to see where the cure is. So anxiety, emotional distress, what we're going to discover is actually learned. Your brain's not broken. You've just learned to face the world with anxiety, right? How does that happen? So the best way that I know to explain this goes back to a seminal study in psychology in the 1920s that J.B. Watson did. So there was a little boy called Albert, and Albert had a little white rat. And he really loved this little white rat. It made him laugh. It made him smile. He used to play with it all the time. They were great buddies. And what Watson began to do was come behind little Albert whenever he was playing with the white rat and smash a big iron bar against a pan. Back then, research and sadism were not entirely distinguishable. So, of course, little Albert would start to cry and crawl away from the rat, right? He wanted to get away from it. Now, Watson continued to make this horrible loud noise until, after a number of times, he stopped. Except even though he stopped making the loud noise, little Albert continued to cry and crawl away from the rat. And what this proved is that fear is learned, right? Little Albert was not scared of the rat. Loud noise becomes associated with the rat. Now, even without the loud noise, he's still scared, right? The fear has been maintained. And this shows us that most fears are not innate. I mean, we are not born afraid of rats or spiders or parallel parking, although that one is pretty awful. We actually develop these fears. We learn to fear. We actually learn to fear. Now, Watson's colleagues began to show that if little Albert had stayed in the presence of the rat without crawling away from it, over time, wouldn't have happened immediately, but over time, his brain would have come to realize there's no threat here, there's no problem, and he would have unlearned that anxiety. That's assuming that it wasn't a biter, this rat, which it wasn't. It was more of a hamster, which proves that they weren't complete sadists back then. And so avoidance teaches the brain to fear. Now, that's a good thing if you're avoiding a hot stove. Not such a good thing if you are avoiding groups of people. which is what somebody with panic disorder might do to stop the panicky feelings that they've got when they're around people. Yeah. So, Ken, if we run from what we're scared of, right, whatever that is, giving a presentation, job interviews, asking women out, whatever it is that you're scared of, that is not intrinsically threatening, if you keep avoiding it, if you keep running away from it, you're telling your brain, this is threatening, this is dangerous, and here's what's going to happen. You're going to feel better at first. Oh, great, I didn't have to do the presentation at work. Oh, great, I'm not asking the girl out. I feel better. Your brain goes, oh, look, you feel better. That must have been dangerous. Look, because look how much better you're feeling by not doing that, right? So you feel better at first, but guess what? You feel worse later. Why do you feel worse later? Because the things that you're avoiding, you probably have to, you have to come into contact with them, right? Because otherwise your life just narrows down until you're just living in a corner somewhere. Yeah? Now, if you run towards what you fear, assuming that it's not intrinsically threatening, yeah, you feel worse at first, right? Because you've programmed your brain to be scared of this thing, so it's worse. That's why people don't want to do this, right? But if you keep running towards what you fear, eventually what happens, you start to feel better, right? Because your brain realizes, hey, nothing bad's actually going to happen here. Nobody's dying. It's okay, right? And so this is actually known as habituation. And habituation is the way in which we become desensitized to any repetitive stimulus. So just imagine that, I know you live in a quiet area. So imagine now you move to a really busy area. You move to the middle of Joburg CBD. Yeah. Now, it's going to be really noisy. In fact, that's probably not a good example because the Joburg CBD is pretty dangerous. Let's say you move to the middle of the Cape Town CBD, okay, because that's allowed to be less dangerous. Okay, so we know it's not a dangerous place, right? But you're going to go there and you're going to hear the noise of traffic, right? And you're going to be very attuned to it because you're currently in a very quiet place, right? And so that can actually be quite disturbing. But as you continue to live there, your brain goes, oh, this increase in traffic isn't actually a problem. There's no issue here. And it starts to block it out naturally. That's habituation. Imagine watching your worst horror movie, like the scariest horror movie you can possibly imagine. The first time you watch it, you're terrified. Yeah. The 50th time you watch it, you're bored. And this is how habituation works. What it shows us is that repeated exposure, that's the key word here, exposure to a perceived threat, as long as it isn't actually threatening, will over time reprogram our brains to no longer activate that alarm signal and that anxiety. Yeah. And so there's actually a whole therapy that uses this. It's called exposure therapy. And I'm proud to tell you it actually was created at the University of Cape Town in the 1950s. And it is one of the most effective forms of treatment for specific forms of anxiety like phobia or even PTSD. And the basic principle is, you don't go back to your childhood. You don't keep talking about, what happened, in the past. You actually deal with the thing that you're scared of right now, whatever it is. And through this process of exposure, you eventually unlearn the anxiety. Now, it can be a little bit scary, this at first, right? Like imagine you're on a 50-foot cliff and your therapist says, jump, right? Jump, it's safe. You're like, yeah, maybe you've been taking your own drugs. Yeah, but of course, even when you do jump, you realize, well, it's not a real cliff, right? And that's the thing, Ken. Anxiety is a poser. Yeah, it's like they say in Texas, all hat and no cattle, right? It's a perception. It's not real, right? And so through exposure, we realize this. Now, I'm going to share with you now a simple 5-step process that anybody can use, if you have got something in your life, something specific that you want to overcome your fear towards. And this is really just a very simple process because if you just run towards what you fear initially, it can be a little scary. It can really spike your anxiety. You can kind of re-traumatize yourself and they never want to do it again. So there's 5 steps. And the first one is go gradual on this, right? So if you're scared of, say, heights, before just going up to the top of Hillbrow Tower, what you really want to do is just imagine yourself on a high building. And even if that's too anxiety provoking, start with story 1, then story 2, then story 3. So just gradually in your imagination, just see yourself doing that. And that has been found to really help. And then you would actually create a little graduated process for yourself. So first you might go to the first floor. In reality, 2nd floor, 3rd floor, 5th floor. And you do this over days, right? And so it's step by step, not too much too soon. Now you want to make it a habit. You need to repeat it. So you don't want to just do this once because it's going to be scary. You've got to do it and you've got to do it again. It's like going to gym, right? You've got to change those muscles. It takes time. So every day you want to be doing a little more, taking yourself a little bit further, not too much too soon, but a little more each day. You want to remain in the situation. So this is very important. So if you do actually get onto that 2nd floor and you're like, oh, this is a little scary, stay there. Don't run away, because if you run away, you're avoiding, you're telling your brain there's a problem here. So that's actually going to then increase the anxiety, right? So to the best of your ability, stay there so that you can learn to habituate, which you will, by the way, as long as you stay there, stay with it. You will habituate. You want to avoid defenses. So you don't want to take anti-anxiety drugs or alcohol when you do that, right? Because that's actually going to then block your full experience, right? And that's exactly the same as, this is why, interestingly, what happens with anti-anxiety drugs are actually prevent us from exposure. They prevent us from actually experiencing this thing that we're scared of, right? And then number 5 is don't be disappointed. If the anxiety doesn't disappear immediately, this takes time. This is actually about feeling the fear and doing it anyway. Yeah? Feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And learning to tolerate the distress. Right? I think a lot of people think, no, the distress has got to go away. No. Folks, the healing comes when you learn to tolerate. You learn to allow it to be there. And over time, yes, it will then decrease and ultimately dissolve. So I found this really helpful. It certainly takes the tops of your anxiety off when you actually just stay there. So remember, I had intrusive thoughts. So the exposure therapy for intrusive thoughts is you just stay with those thoughts. In fact, you'd actually bring them on. That's actually, this whole idea is that it's kind of the bring it on therapy. It's like, I'm not running away, I'm running towards, I did not find it entirely effective. And I think partly because with thoughts, if you constantly thinking about the thought all day, you can also be increasing the neurological wiring underneath that thought. And so while, as I say, it took off the tops of the anxiety, it was not entirely helpful. I've subsequently come to see that exposure, yes, can be very helpful for specific kinds of fears and anxieties. And in the series, we're going to look at others. But for me personally, I needed more than that. And what it ultimately came to me, and perhaps we should just back up a little, Ken, because as you know, in the Transcender method, there's 3 main strategies that we have for transforming our life and emotional states. And the first is action. Yeah. A lot of therapy is about your thoughts and your interpretations, and that has its place. But, even CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the criticisms is it would have you believe, everything's okay except for your thoughts. Well, no, sometimes actually there's something in the world you need to change, right? And that's why, when we do the 5 master question coach, we always ask the first question, well, after what is it, the challenge, what can I do about it, right? What can I do about it, right? And that helps us to break out of our thoughts. Because as we know, so much of our thoughts is what produces that anxiety, right? There's a particular kind of thinking, overthinking, that produces anxiety. It's called worrying. A particular kind of overthinking that produces depression. It's called rumination. Yeah. So you keep on thinking about negative thoughts going round and round in your head, looking for causes and consequences. And the light coming in on your face absolutely looks gorgeous, Ken. So I know that, I think for a moment, you were like, ooh, that's interesting. You're an artist. Your artwork, and you're blessed by the sun, the glow. You're glowing. You're glowing. You have a halo glow around you. And I know that everybody watching this will absolutely agree. It's light, Ken. It's the light that's being shone here on this topic. So the first really is, so what action does is it helps us break out of that overthinking, right? Because so much of the issue here, right, particularly the perceived threat, it's not out there, it's in here, and it's the way we talk ourselves into this. We raise the threat perception by the way that we talk to ourselves, right? We call this also catastrophizing, the way we make things worse than they are. Now, that first key is action. Take action, because actually, if you just ask yourself, what can I do about it? If there is even a real threat, I know this is great if there's a perceived threat or a real threat, what can I do about it? Helps you to break out of all that obsessive thinking, right? Which is actually, I say it's like inflammation. Thinking is an adaptive immune response gone rogue, overthinking, right? So thinking is adaptive in the sense that, I mean, it's enables humans to, master the universe, right? The ability to envision the future, to learn from the past. But overthinking, it's like inflammation. It's too much, right? And it's gone rogue. And so one of the ways to break through that is, what can I do about it and get action oriented? And this is what I learned about exposure therapy as well, is that we're not going to sit here and analyze, right? And that's what, by the way, Freud called it psychoanalysis. Yeah, I call this overthinking, interestingly, worrying, analysis, and rumination. I'm not saying a little bit of analysis cannot be helpful to help you understand what's going on in your life. But when you go round and round, it has this sort of addictive, compulsive quality, you're in worrying, analysis, or rumination. Now, action, right, is the first of the three strategies of the Transcender method, is like, what can I do about it, right? Again, this is really great if there's a real challenge out there as well, because a lot of people, there are real challenges. But great also sometimes just to cut through even those perceived challenges. What can I do about it? And exposure is a form of action that we can take, right? So exposure is, instead of obsessing about this, I'm actually just going to put together a plan of action, and I'm going to, run to the fear. Feel the fear and do it anyway, right? Do it anyway. Take action. But that's only one strategy, and it's effective. But I found that there's two others that we need. The second is reinterpretation. Now, reinterpretation really links to CBT, to cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's about changing our perspective. And we've discussed that, and we know how important that is, right? So just finding a more resourceful, optimistic, positive way to think about things. And what reinterpretation helps us to see is that thoughts are not reality, they're just an interpretation. King Solomon, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. The Buddha, nothing can disturb you as much as your own thoughts. Epictetus, the Roman philosopher, it's not things that disturb us, but our thoughts about them. Hamlet, there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And we all know this, Ken, right? We've got two people in the same situation, maybe the same challenge. The one is whinging, whining, crying, moaning, groaning. Why is this so bad? Why is this happening? And the other saying, hey, you know what? Boom, a challenge, yeah. Bring it on, baby. Bring it on, right? The greatest thing that ever happened to David was Goliath, yeah? Let me learn, let me grow, right? And I used this myself, right? With my own intrusive thoughts and anxiety. It was like, yay, let me take this on and figure this out and find those solutions, right? So very helpful. Particularly, each of these strategies that I'm going to share are really helpful in different areas. Like if you want to create the life of your dreams, you need to take a lot of action. But sometimes you create the life of your dreams and you're still not that happy and you're kind of disappointed and dissatisfied. It may be because you're focusing on everything that's wrong instead of what's right. Yeah, that's the amazing thing, right? You can win the lottery and then be anxious about who your true friends are. You can find the love of your life and then be anxious about them leaving you. Isn't that amazing, right? Like we can create threats even about seemingly positive things. And we can shift that with our reinterpretation, right? By changing some of our thoughts and our beliefs and shifting our mindset, focusing on what we have wrong and what we don't. By the way, a very powerful tool here is gratitude. Yeah. Who is rich, he rejoices in his lot. It's not what we have, it's our appreciation of what we have. Yeah. So very powerful practice, gratitude practice each day. Now, action, reinterpretation, very powerful tools. But for me, Ken, that wasn't the cure for me. For me, it's what I call transcendence. Now, I'd spent tens of thousands on coaches and psychologists because, I realized that I did not know. And I'm really grateful that I met a very wise old woman who shared with me what I've come to call transcendence. And it wasn't that in that one session with her, boom, it was, I was cured. It was she introduced me to the tools that would ultimately lead to my recovery. So what is transcendence? Well, let's go back to thoughts, right? So remember our thoughts, think of your thoughts as a security guard telling you, talking to you about the threats, right? Remember, the brain is primarily interested in these threats, right? So your thoughts are talking about these threats. And most of the time, the security guard's overreactive, right? So the security guard, it's like one of those, crazy dudes who loves his gun and his uniform, and, he's like seeing danger everywhere, yeah? Now, with action, we act on the thoughts, right? And sometimes that's appropriate, particularly if there's a real threat. With reinterpretation, we question the thoughts. We question the security guard. We say, dude, hold on a second. Is it really as bad as you think it is? Like, is it really that bad? Like, maybe it's not so bad, right? And let me also just point out, I know we've been talking a lot about threats as if they're all sort of external, and even the perceived ones are external. Remember, we live in the most unprecedented comfort and safety in the history of humankind. I know we don't always feel like that, but if your caveman ancestors are to come here now, just imagine they would feel like they were in heaven. Endless food, entertainment, this masterclass, okay, that might throw them off a little bit. The point is that, like, we have this abundance, and yet, as we know, that actually has produced our emotional distress, and we now understand why that is, because, even though we have this abundance, we still have minds that are programmed to look out for threats. So we might not find threats in the external environment. We might find threats in ourselves. What's one of the biggest threats we have? Am I good enough? Am I okay? Yeah. Do people like me, right? Because for our caveman ancestors and for us, I mean, so much of our ability to survive and thrive depends on our social groups, right? Human beings are the most social creatures on the planet. If you were rejected by your tribe, you would die. By the way, this is why rejection can be so painful for people. It's actually perceived as an existential threat, because if you're rejected by your tribe, you would die. Now, of course, in today's world, you don't die because, you weren't, in the cool kid group, but it can feel really, really distressing, right? And so the threat becomes about me. And I can tell you, Ken, in the work that I do with people in the Transcender Method, the core fear that I see with most people, when you get down there, when you get down to the base of it, which is where we go with Transcender, because you've got to get there, right? When you get there, it's a beautiful thing. When you go there and realize it's actually the Wizard of Oz, the scary old man, you pull open the curtain and you see, actually, there's no monster here. It's just a frail, little, weak old man, right? So when you actually go to that pain, but that pain is what? That pain is usually, I'm not good enough, And I can tell you, Ken, I'll never forget Oprah talking about, she was interviewed after her show came to an end about her experiences, and I'll never forget her talking about the one thing that her guest asked more than anything else at the end of an interview. And she said, a serial killer had asked this, and Jeffrey Dahmer, I think it was Jeffrey Dahmer, and Rihanna had asked this. Was I okay? Yeah? Was I okay, right? And so that then becomes the threat, right? Am I okay? Am I acceptable? Do you like me, right? And so a lot of our threats are actually social threats, right? They're about our position within our family, within our friends, within work. In fact, you'll find that actually almost all emotional distress tends to be triggered by something relationship related. Yeah. And we'll address this in later classes. But so given that the anxiety can really affix to anything, but that it will always be mediated through our thoughts. So we might not actually have the thoughts, I'm not good enough. When I work with people, they will usually go there, but the thought could just be, or I'm going to fail, or things aren't going to work out, or, you know, I don't want to go and ask her out because she might not say no, or, you know, they're not always articulated in that way, but that is the security guard, right? That's the security guard. And in fact, you know, the biggest bully isn't in the schoolyard, it's actually in our own heads. Because what happens is that that security guard often beats us up and says, you aren't good enough. Now, it's not doing that because it's a total sadist. On some level, it thinks that if it tells you that, then you will not take too many risks and make things worse, because remember, it always thinks that things are going to happen, or that by beating you up about this, you will then do something. But in fact, it doesn't work like that. That bully does not help you become a better human being. I can tell you this. It reminds me of a beautiful friend of mine. She said to me, oh, she was talking about herself and she called herself fatty. I was like, you know, firstly, you know, this person is not fat, right? And I was like, well, you know, why you call yourself fatty? She said, well, you know, I don't need to lose weight. And so, you know, if I do this, then I'll motivate myself. Well, in fact, what we know is that shaming yourself in that way actually reduces proactive behavior because it creates more stress, more adrenaline, more cortisol, and more self-medication with food. And more, I mean, it's just not helpful. If anything, what we know is self-compassion, ease, really being a friend to yourself is actually far more effective. Mm. So it's the thoughts themselves, right? Going back to our 3 strategies, the art of life, action, reinterpretation, transcendence. So with action, we act on the thoughts, sometimes appropriate. With reinterpretation, we change the content of our thoughts. Yeah. So if we said, in fact, let me give you a direct example. Let's say I had this feeling I'm a failure. With action, I would say, well, hold on, you know, maybe I am a failure. Like actually, I fail at 99% of things I would fail, right? I mean, very, very few of us can do everything. I do a failed mountain climber. I mean, I should not try and climb a mountain because I'm going to die. But if I want to climb a mountain, it would be good to acknowledge the fact that, no, I'm not good enough. That's the other thing, you know, also this whole kind of, you know, tell yourself how amazing and fantastic and wonderful you are and that everything you do is great. No, like, be honest. Yes. You know, actually I am, you know, I know that in the books that I write, yes, I write lots of books. You wanted to read the first book I wrote, it was a piece of garbage. And I needed to be honest and open about that so that I could improve my skills and become better at doing that, right? So this isn't about, that's where I love action, about, so let's focus on this, I'm not good enough. Take action. How do you improve yourself? How do you upskill yourself? How do you get free feedback from people, from environments? And, you know, that's where you want to be, right? The old self-esteem movement from the 1980s where you tell every kid they were amazing and, you know, if they came last, they got the prize for, you know, whatever it was, you know, trying the best, or that's not helpful because you get into the real world and you realize that's not the way it works, right? Your self-esteem gives you, it's a little bit of a barometer. It can be a barometer. Some people, even though when they're doing well, the self-esteem is still low. So I'm not talking about that. But for most people, it's a bit of a barometer. If things are going well, you should tend to feel pretty good. But if they aren't, yes, sometimes you need to take action. Go fix it. Go and upskill yourself. Go and get this right. Yeah. But if you are one of these people where you've got it all right, but you're still not feeling great about yourself, possibly you have internalized a parent who told you weren't good enough, right? According to Dr. Freud. And so, yes, I'm not saying that early childhood events don't help and us to understand, but reliving and going through and going around is not particularly helpful. But yeah, okay, maybe that's what happened. But you're now going to deal with this voice right here. It could be helpful with reinterpretation to say, hey, how can I, hold on, am I a failure? Hold on, no, and some actually no. Look, you know, this is really working, that's working. Actually, people tell me this is amazing. Yeah. So then we go to reinterpretation. But with transcendence, we rise above the thought. With transcendence, we recognize that it's just a thought. So most of the time, we are identified with our thoughts. We are fused with our thoughts. So if I have the thought, I'm a failure, I experience myself as a failure, right? Or if I have the thought, you are a malicious bitch who is just trying to hurt me, I experience you in that way. But what if these thoughts were just the product of an overreactive threat detection system? Yeah? Then it wouldn't really be appropriate to act on them. It certainly would be appropriate to believe them, Yeah. And so it might be better just to acknowledge them as thoughts, like clouds in the sky. They come and they go. Now, you could reinterpret them, but sometimes your interpretation can get you into debate and an argument with yourself. So yes, no, I really am a success. No, but actually, are you a success? And this is a way to go above and beyond, right, the thoughts, where you can simply see them for what they are. Yeah, they really are just thoughts. But Ken, you probably noticed emotional distress is not just thoughts. And it comes with something else, doesn't it? And that's bodily feelings, right? I mean, we talk about stress. In fact, you could have a negative thought. If you had a wonderful, exhilarating bodily feeling, you wouldn't have a problem with that thought, right? But it's because the thought is connected with something that's going on in your body, right? And it could be a constriction in your chest, or it could be, this really unpleasant sort of tingling in your tummy, or it could be a lump in your throat, yeah, or your face flashing, or the heat, the pressure. I mean, there's a reason why emotion and feeling is used interchangeably, because emotions are felt in the body. Now, when we have this intense constriction in our chest, just like a thought, in the same way as people generally think of their thoughts as reality, if I'm having this thought, it must be true. Unthinkingly, unconsciously, they experience these feelings, these bodily feelings, as a reality that they need to act on. Oh my gosh, I've got this great constriction. That means I must fight. I must flight. Or at least I must tell my partner what a bloody idiot they are, right? But what if they are just sensations? What if they're just sensations produced by an overreactive threat detection system? Well, then that would not be appropriate. And transcendence is about being able to see the sensations, to diffuse awareness from sensations, to see the thoughts, to de-identify with the thoughts, to see the thoughts and sensations simply as appearances in the field of awareness. And in doing this, we begin to realize that we are so much more than our thoughts and sensations, man. We are what I call the infinite potential of awareness. Our essential nature is awareness. It's this open field. And these sensations that come in, these thoughts that come in, are just these transient thoughts and sensations. They come and they go. And when you start to see that and experience that, it's so liberating, because you realize how much more you are. Maybe in some way, how much less you are, which is kind of cool too. Like, you just are. You're just awareness, yeah? And those sensations and thoughts, I'm a failure. It's not even that much difference to I'm a success. The reinterpretation is about I'm a success. It's difficult to hold on to being a success. Nobody's a success all the time. I fail far more than I succeed. So if I'm going to hang on to my sense of self of being a success, man, I'm going to be disappointed and frustrated and dissatisfied most of the time. But if you can transcend that, you don't have to be a success. You don't have to be a failure. Of course, it's fun being a success. Don't get me wrong. I like creating. I like manifesting. I like building. I like, making shit happen. So this isn't about, I mean, if you want to go and, relinquish all of that, like the Buddhist monks do, that's fine. I've got big respect for them. But no, I like playing in the world. I like making stuff happen. But that's why I like each of these strategies, action, reinterpretation, because I think each of them, when you're acting, you're in the story. It's great. It's fun. You're playing a character. You're making the plot. You're moving it forward, right? When you're reinterpreting, you're changing the story, right? You're starting to have some magic. But when you're transcending, you get out of the damn story. You get out of the damn story. You step aside and you say, hey, man, it's just a story. It's like this kid, playing a video game. I actually don't play video games. I never have. But I keep getting this analogy in my mind, like, what if this is just a video game? Like, what if, Candace is actually just an avatar? Justin is just an avatar, and we're playing this thing and we think this is who I am. Like, we think, damn, this is me. And you're like, dude, you've forgotten, man. You're just playing a little game here. Now you might say, no, well, hold on. You're not playing. Look, we don't know. Like we could be, like we might die and suddenly realize we're just playing a game. But it doesn't matter whether that happens or not. On some level, this is just an avatar. It's a game that changes, right? You're playing a different game to the one you're playing 10 years ago, the one you're playing 10 years future. Your sense of self transforms. I know we think of ourselves as being this sort of constant self, but that's not actually it at all. So I know I'm kind of getting out there into the deep cosmic funk. So let's bring it back to getting over anxiety here, Ken, because I think I'd like to readdress our sense of self in a later masterclass. But what can you do? Because we want to talk about what can you do? Okay, so in the moment, you know now that if you've got a specific fear, you want to use that exposure process. You want to run to that fear gradually. You want to check your interpretation. Understand that your anxiety, is actually, by the way, guys, anxiety is a story as well. It's just a story. And in fact, the physiological basis of anxiety and excitement is pretty much the same thing. Increased heart rate, breathing, blood pressure. So, interpretation is also about saying, oh, I'm feeling this anxiety. Well, I'm feeling excitement. I've got energy in my body, and we even know that if you've got to go do a big presentation and you interpret those increased heart rates and breathing and blood pressure, if you interpret it as excitement, you are much more confident, you much less fearful, and you give a better presentation. If you go, oh my God, this is stressful, this is bad, I shouldn't be having these feelings, you create resistance, right? And as the great Carl Jung said, what you resist doesn't persist, it grows in size. And this is the big problem with anxiety. It's resistance. If we're looking for a cure for anxiety, it is allow, let it be. So in the same way as you expose yourself, if you were trying to overcome an external fear like that of heights. So for me, what was really helpful with these intrusive thoughts, I realized why meditation and relaxation wasn't helping me. Because every time I had the thoughts, I was resisting them. I was trying to stop them with meditation, with relaxation, with deep breathing. So what was I telling my brain? This is dangerous. This is bad. This is threatening. And it became scary and scary and scary. I mean, I can say, I'll never forget, I had the most incredible meditational practice. I was like, man, I was like incandescent glow of ecstasy. And I came out of that and boom, rebound of anxiety, man. It was like I had just taken, a bunch of drugs and got into this high and came off it to a major withdrawal. Now, people don't think of that when they think meditation. And listen, most of the time, meditation, like exercise, is healthy, right? It's fine. I'm not saying don't meditate. I'm saying if you're using it to defend yourself against, right, this anxiety, then you're not allowing your mind to learn that there's no threat here. And so we're going to talk specifically about intrusive thoughts in another masterclass. But even if you don't suffer from intrusive thoughts, a lot of anxiety is just sensations, right? So with panic disorder, that increased heart rate, or a thought of abuse or trauma or something, And when you just allow that to be there, and by allow, I don't mean telling a story, okay? I don't mean worrying, ruminating, analyzing. Okay? That's very important. Right? If you start, those are defense mechanisms. By the way, in the Transcendent Method, we learn, right? You've got 5 major defense mechanisms. Avoidance. So if you're scared of something, keeping away from it. It's a defense mechanism that's ultimately going to increase your anxiety. Remember, make you feel better at first, but worse later. This stands for at wars. Avoidance. Threat monitoring. So threat monitoring is this thing where you can do it with your own body. Oh my gosh, that little sensation. Oh my gosh, is that a disease? Is that in my heart? Is that what's going on there? And I promise you, whatever you look for, you will find. It's the way the mind works. So monitoring, threat monitoring, you can do it externally as well. Oh my gosh, is there something going on out there? It's at the door, it's at the window. You'll hear something. Oh boy, you will hear something. That rustle in the trees will be, a great big monster that is coming to get you, right? Because if what you look for, you will find, right? So that's threat monitoring. I was doing threat monitoring with my own thoughts. So even when I wasn't having the thoughts, I was thinking, I wonder where the thoughts are. Yeah, dude, I wonder where the thoughts are. You can have the thoughts, right? So threat monitoring is a defense mechanism that again makes things worse. And then worrying, analysis, and rumination. Those are actually defense mechanisms too. Because when you worry, you can actually feel better. You feel like you're solving, like you're making it progress here. So that's why people actually quite enjoy worrying, right? Or analyzing, you're going, oh, I'm sorting it out. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to make sure I understand this. Or ruminating, yeah, what happened in the past with that ex that didn't work out? What was wrong with me? What didn't I do right so I can make sure I don't do that in the future? So it's actually a defense mechanism instead of actually facing the reality. Okay, yes, I'm in pain, I've just been dumped. This person that I love is not there. And okay, I'm just going to live with that and sit with that and allow those sensations to just be there, right? By ruminating, analyzing, you're getting into the story, which is actually pulling you away from the essential pain, right? As the Buddhists say, pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Pain is inevitable, okay? Very important. In fact, a lot of transcendence is about tolerating the pain. But it's in trying to stop the pain with worrying, analysis, rumination, that actually the pain, that's where the suffering is, right? And interesting, Cam, the S, so at wars, the S is solution finding. That was mine. So at the height of my own anxiety and intrusive thoughts, man, I would become obsessed on the internet. I'd be looking at every treatment, every research paper, man. And what happened is I'd find something, some new study, and I'd be so excited. But yes, I found this, and I'd actually feel better. I go, oh my God, it's true, it's gone. The anxiety's gone, the intrusive thoughts are gone. Placebo effect. What's the placebo effect? It's the belief that something is going to work. So just the belief that something's going to work actually reduces emotional distress, right? Because if you really believe in it, suddenly your emotional distress is gone. So constant solution finding, the next self-help thing, the next meditational technique. And I know somebody watching this right now is probably thinking, well, aren't you just one of the next? Well, yeah, you're going to have to try this out and figure out if it works for you. But I can tell you, I know that. I was going from every little technique and therapy, and I was getting a high. I was getting a total high on every new technique and therapy and self-help method that I found there. And it would always make me feel better initially, right? And that's the test here. So if you apply the Transcender method, you want to make, first, it's the Transcender method, it's actually probably going to get worse before it gets better, right? So, but if you're just feeling better for 5 minutes, then you know that you've got the placebo effect. And by the way, placebo effect can be very powerful because it's about belief. Again, this is a bigger topic. Belief is important, but it's not enough, right? So again, having the belief that something is going to help and work is important, but if there isn't anything else there to help you, it's not going to work out for you. So those are the defense mechanisms. Those are the forms of resistance that actually make you feel better at first, but worse later, right? Because you're telling your brain, if I have to avoid, if I have to avoid, there's a threat. If I have to threat monitor, there's a threat. If I'm worrying, analyzing, and ruminating, there's a threat. If I'm looking for solutions all the time, there's a threat. Ken, do you know what I came to realize? One of the most healing things for me is there's no problem. There's nothing to solve. I remember formulating it as this: do nothing.
Oh, wow.
There's nothing to do. Like all the self-help and therapy and coaching is all about, I got to do and do and do and do and do. Now, I understand it's not so simple to do nothing, okay? Because we're so used to doing something. And this was tough for me. I thought, oh, that's it. I got it. But just do nothing. But, that old saying, don't just sit there, do something. No, don't just do something, sit there. Don't just even sit there. Allow. Let it be. Not let it go. Not let it go yet. Because I also, let it go. Let it go can be resistance, pushing away. Let it go. Go away. Go away. Go away. There's nothing. You don't have to let it go because it's okay. Just let it be. Let it be. And so transcendence, the first, most critical, most important step of transcendence is allow. You have a uncomfortable body feeling, allow, let it be there. It's okay. You have an uncomfortable thought or image, allow, it's okay, let it be there. Anxiety is probably going to go up, but that's okay because all anxiety is a story about sensations and thoughts. So let those sensations and thoughts come. And as they come, the brain goes, it's okay, because you're saying it's okay, because you're not running away, because you're not engaging in defense mechanisms. So the critical thing is allow. Now, you can actually tell yourself allow. This is what I did with my own thoughts and body feelings. As I experienced them, I just said allow, allow, allow. What you can also do, and this is a little acronym that I've created here, now, allow now, because it's all about the present moment, Ken. Anxiety is all about the future. Depression is all about the past. When you're in the present, there's much less suffering in the present. You can be here now, right? I'm not saying that there isn't pain in the present, but when you actually sit with that pain. So how do you do that? Allow now. What that means is now, name. So you can say thought. There's the thought. So I got this thought. It's this uncomfortable thought. Thought, that's all it is, right? So it's a way to transcend, to say, I'm not going to believe the thought, run with the thought, engage with the thought, get married with the thought. I'm just going to note it. There's a thought. Sensation. Ooh, there's a sensation. Just notice it curiously. Oh, are you that sensation? No, it's just a sensation. Watch it. Watch the energy move. And if you do this, it's something so beautiful, soothing, and magical. You actually will notice, no matter how intense the sensation is, it passes. And the work that I do with people is just so moving to me, because people can be in these intense states of despair and without doing anything. Remember, because this is the do nothing method, just sitting with it. And it's the most beautiful thing. You see in their whole demeanor as they just sit with it. I'm with them, just sit with it. It's okay, because then you can see there's that, I'm going to move wherever. Let it stay. And you just see this dissolving, it's, we don't have to do very much. We don't have to tell stories about our past. We don't have to, jump hoops, mental gymnastics. You just have to allow now, So you can name the thought, you can name the sensation. The O is observe. Just watch it. You don't even have to say in your head thought. Just, there it is. And the W is welcome. Like, it's just reality. This is what I'm in. Yeah, like, it's the opposite of what we're doing, right? It's the opposite of resistance. It's just like, it reminds me of Rumi, the Sufi poet. This being as a guest house. Are you familiar with the poem? Yeah, beautiful, isn't it? And I kind of feel like we should read it. I'm gonna see if I can quickly get it up here, because there is something about that poem that just really, I think, gets to the heart of this. So this is the beautiful thing, right? We can suddenly make these calls. So I won't read the whole thing, but for anybody who hasn't come across it, this being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. It's all those thoughts and sensations are these little visitors. It's just energy, isn't it? They just come. Yeah, welcome. Entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each one honorably, maybe clearing you out for some new delight. So I don't say you can always welcome. I wasn't always able to welcome like the great Rumi. But I think it's just something to bear in mind, that allow now is that I'm going to allow whatever is in this moment. I'm going to allow it to help you. You could just name it, observe it, and ultimately just come with a welcoming attitude. Like, it's okay. It's okay. I mean, even that phrase, it's a phrase I used to use a lot. It's okay. It's okay. It's almost like you need to parent yourself, soothe yourself. It's okay. We're good here. There's no threat. Remember, the threat detection system is your security guard. Another way of thinking about it is like an overreactive mother who's always like scared and, telling you that bad things are going to happen. You're like, Ma, it's okay. I get you. Because you don't want to start fighting with the security guard. You don't want to start fighting with your mother. You don't want to start fighting, because then it's resistance, right? You don't want a tug of war with yourself. So you don't want to get into tug of war. So even if you keep hearing that voice, just ignore, there's the voice. There's the overreactive mother. There's the security guard. The other thing that I do, for me, my big thing is analysis. So remember, we've got worrying, analysis, rumination. It's probably part of the work that I do, Cand. I mean, I write books and you do too, and we're analytical people, right? So I love this stuff. I get off on it. But the dark side of it is that then it can become a defense mechanism, right? When as a way for me to not create my pain. So one of the things that I say, if I'm in a difficult situation with someone or whatever, and I find myself getting into this ruminative, an analytical addictive, compulsive thinking is as I might notice it, certainly you can just name the thought, but sometimes you actually just say, analysis, rumination, that's worry. And it's just a way to create some distance in your mind between, again, your awareness and that particular appearance, that phenomenon of the overthinking. So, yeah, allow now. And, anybody who's struggling with anxiety right now, maybe just a quick recap, the art of life is the Transcender method. You've got 3 strategies here. And we activate these strategies we can activate them through the 5 master question coach system. The 5 master question coach. Question 1 is, what is it? So just define what's going on, right? So it could be a specific situation, could be a relationship issue, could be a business issue, or could just be an emotional issue. So just define it. By the way, really helpful to write this down because it helps to slow down the mind and get clarity and focus. Second question is, what can I do about it, right? Write down 5 actions, because you want to get into a solution-oriented mindset. Action focus. And I just used the word solution, and I just said, now solutions can be the issue. But remember, we're going through these systematically. Sometimes, yes, what you do need is, for problems out there, you need actual solutions. So this is also important. People often, they take one thing and they think, well, that applies. And a man with a hammer thinks every problem is a nail. Okay. There's different, when you're dealing with external problems, you need to take action. Okay. Not always, but often you need to take action, right? And you need solutions. Okay. When you're doing it internal problems, that's usually not the case. So question 1, what is it? Question 2, what can I do about it? Yeah. Write down 5 solutions. You only need 1. It's often that crazy solution with a bit of tweaking you're able to use. Question 3, what is good about it? That's reinterpretation, right? What is good about it? And I know that sounds a little crazy. By the way, that question has been asked and answered about the Holocaust by Jews. Okay, and it doesn't mean the Holocaust was a good thing. It means it's possible to find something good out of anything that happens. Yeah. Best thing that ever happened to David was Goliath, right? So finding the dividend, the good, right, in what's going on helps you to become more resourceful. And actually, these interact because you often find yourself more proactive with a better interpretation. So number 3 is, what is good about it? Number 4 is, what really is it? Now, when we ask what really is it, we'll go deeper. So usually when I'm coaching people, what really is it? Now I'm scared about my business failing will usually become down to I'm a failure, right? Or I'm not good enough, right? Not always, but usually it comes down to that. So we want to get to that. That's what really is it, right? Go to the core pain. You actually want to feel that core pain, then you're there. And now we ask the question again, what really is it? Now we answer the question not from inside the story, but from out the story. What really is it? Oh, it's a thought. Oh, it's a sensation. And as you know, Cand, what we do on this, and those of you on the Transcender method, you'll know that we then close our eyes and actually see the thoughts up on a screen, just so that we can create some space between awareness and the thought. And then we'll actually observe the sensation. And just by observing the thoughts and sensation, that's where this beautiful, soothing, magical dissolution of the thoughts and sensations takes place. And then the final question, the 5th question, is, what do I choose? Because we all know that we can have an emotional breakthrough. We can have a transformation. The next day, that threat detection system's still there, right? So what do you choose to do when that happens again? So that's just where you set your intention. You set your intention for now what you're going to do when this re-arises. And that's really helpful, so that when it does re-arise, you don't kind of feel like deer in the headlights. You've actually, you know what you're going to do. And it might be taking one of the actions. It might be a better interpretation. Hey, this is here for me to learn and grow. Or it might be just saying, hey, when that happens again, I'm not going to ruminate. And if I do, I'm just going to label the rumination. I'm just going to label the thoughts, name the thought, name the sensation. Wow, Ken, we covered a lot.
Wow. And I have to tell you, Jess, honestly, I've been through the Transcender method, and it is genuinely a brilliant way to come in tune with yourself in a way that I wasn't expecting. I think many therapeutic methods, as I've experienced, is very much about fixing its problem. There's something to be fixed. So with the Transcender method, it didn't just improve my anxiety. I found that it actually improved how I operate daily. And so a beautiful thing that you're sharing, and I'm so privileged. And I think everyone who's been listening to this conversation and this masterclass feels empowered. And I think the understanding of what's going on with ourselves creates a template at which we can see life differently. So thank you so much. And I'm so looking forward to the rest of these conversations, because we're going to be diving into a lot of different topics.
Absolutely, Cand, absolutely. And I want to thank you so much. It's really been, it's been, you just have such a great way about you. And I just love the way that you've brought these insights out. And so I am really looking forward to the next one, because we're going to, as you say, we're going to go deep into each one of those different, if anybody's out there specifically has an issue with panic, we're going to focus specifically on panic. We're going to focus on insomnia. We're going to focus on OCD, right? And we're going to see how this transcendent principles actually apply to each one of those. And then one of these days, we're going to do something on you as well, Ken, because you are the master on getting over resentments and forgiveness. So I really am looking forward to that too.